The insult fell upon her like a blade sharpened on whispers. The Duke of Ashbourne scarcely notices her, poor thing, to be bartered like cattle for his lands. Lady Eleanor heard it, though she was not meant to. The words, exchanged between two ladies fluttering their fans at the edge of the ballroom, slid through the polished air and pierced her with cruel precision. She did not falter outwardly, her training forbade such weakness, but within, her heart contracted as though the chandeliers themselves had dimmed. She stood upon the marble floor, satin skirts brushing the ground, every breath an act of defiance against humiliation. The ballroom was a temple of spectacle that night, ablaze with golden light and alive with the rustle of silks and the murmur of the tun. Music swelled from violins in the gallery, but Eleanor heard only the echo of those careless voices. She forced her gaze upward, her chin delicately lifted, as though she had not been wounded. Yet her composure was thin as porcelain. She knew that cracks, once begun, were impossible to conceal for long. Her father, the Earl of Wexham, led her forward with a stern pride that brooked no argument. He had secured this match, this glittering alliance, and nothing, not gossip, not Eleanor's private sorrow, must tarnish it. His daughter was betrothed to a duke, and he carried that fact as if it were a coronet upon his brow. Eleanor felt the weight of his hand upon her arm like a chain. The duke himself stood at a distance, tall and grave, a figure carved from shadow and steel. His dark coat was severe, his cravat knotted with military precision. He did not seek her eyes, nor offer the smallest smile. To the watching world, he was the very picture of aristocratic detachment, a man who had chosen his bride for rank, not affection. And so the whispers grew, curling through the air like smoke, cold, calculating, indifferent. Each word struck her, though she pretended not to hear. She longed for one glance of tenderness, a single thread to tie her heart to his. But when their eyes did meet across the crowded room, his expression was unreadable, his gaze quickly diverted. It was as if she were no more than a figure in white silk, a pawn in the unending game of families and fortunes. Eleanor had dreamed, once, of marriage as a union of souls, had dreamed of walking in gardens with a man who spoke her name with reverence, of sharing secrets by the firelight, of being cherished. Those girlish hopes had withered beneath the weight of her father's ambition and society's iron laws. A duke, after all, could not be refused. And so she had bowed her head and agreed, though her heart had recoiled. The evening dragged on with cruel majesty. Partners were offered, hands were clasped, laughter rang across the gilded chamber. Eleanor moved through the figures of the dance like a spectre, her body obedient while her mind drifted. Each polite exchange seemed hollow, each smile a mask. All the while, she felt the Duke's presence, a silent monolith, neither cruel nor kind, merely distant. The cruelest wound came not from strangers but from the ladies who had once called her friend. As she passed them, she heard one whisper, soft yet slicing, "A pity, to be unloved before the wedding veil is even lifted." Eleanor's step faltered. She recovered instantly, but the damage was done. The words sank deep, poisoning her with shame. Retreating to the edge of the room, she found a seat beneath a towering column. She folded her hands tightly in her lap, as if to still the trembling. Around her, the ballroom glittered and swirled, indifferent to her private despair. The musicians played on, the chandeliers blazed, and still her fiancé did not come to her side. She thought herself utterly alone. And yet, unseen, he watched her. The Duke of Ashbourne had not been deaf to the whispers nor blind to her quiet suffering. His heart, trained for years to silence and severity, strained against its bonds as he beheld her pale composure. He remembered the first moment he had seen her, months before, in another ballroom lit by winter firelight. She had entered in a gown of ivory, pearls woven into her hair, and in that instant he had whispered words no one else had ever heard, "You are my world." He had buried the confession, smothered it beneath the weight of duty. But the memory clung to him still, searing as a brand. Now, as he saw her isolated and wounded, His hand twitched as though it longed to reach for hers. Yet pride, his ancient companion, restrained him. A duke must never display vulnerability before the hungry eyes of society. To love openly was to court ridicule, to offer rivals a weapon. And so he stood unmoving, his heart locked in silence, even as longing burned through him. For Eleanor, the night felt endless. She rose once more to dance when called upon, her movements flawless, her smile a masterpiece of restraint. But inside, despair spread like frost across her soul. She told herself she would endure. She told herself she was prepared for a marriage without affection, a life of courtesy without intimacy. Better to accept the cold dignity of her fate than to yearn for what could never be. And yet, just as she resolved to bury her heart, something shifted. A simple moment, barely noticed by the crowd, but to her it rang like thunder. She dropped her fan. It slipped from her fingers and fell to the floor, ivory against marble. Before she could stoop to retrieve it, a hand, steady and sure, lifted it. She looked up. It was his. The Duke stood before her, the faintest glimmer of warmth in his dark eyes. As he returned the fan, his fingers brushed hers. No accident, but a touch deliberate, lingering a heartbeat too long. Her breath caught. The air between them vibrated with an unspoken intensity, a language of silence more powerful than any words. "Lady Eleanor," he murmured, his voice low, formal, yet charged with something unguarded. Her lips parted, but no reply came. The music swelled, the crowd spun around them, yet for a moment it was only the two of them, caught in a fragile web of possibility. Then, as swiftly as it had begun, it ended. He withdrew, bowing slightly, his face once more an unreadable mask. He returned to the shadows, leaving Eleanor shaken, her heart beating in confusion. Had she imagined it? That fleeting spark, was it no more than politeness, a trick of longing upon her weary soul? She sat once more, her fan clutched tightly, her mind spinning with questions she could not silence. All around her, society laughed and schemed, oblivious to the storm gathering in her heart. And in the far corner of the ballroom, hidden by pillars and candlelight, the Duke of Ashbourne remained still as stone, his gaze fixed upon her. His lips moved, silently shaping words no one else could hear. "You are my world." But Eleanor did not hear them, and she would not know, not yet, how those words would change everything. The letter was a wound delivered in ink. Eleanor found it waiting upon her writing desk one rain-swept morning, folded with perfect precision and sealed by no crest she recognized. The words were few, yet each cut deep. "Beware, for your Duke's affections do not rest with you. He courts another still, as he always has." There was no signature, no hand she could trace, only the stench of malice clothed in the pretense of kindness. She sat in the pale light, hands trembling, the parchment slipping like a knife from her grasp. The world she had just begun to hope for, the delicate possibility glimpsed in the ballroom, seemed already collapsing into ruin. She told herself not to believe it, that slander was as common in society as pearls at a supper. Yet doubt, once awakened, was relentless. The Duke's reserve, his distance, his fleeting touch that vanished as quickly as it came, what if they were not tokens of restraint, but of disinterest? Her heart, bruised by whispers, seized upon the cruel message as confirmation of all her deepest fears. The rain beat steadily upon the windows of her chamber, and Eleanor pressed the letter to her lap, feeling the storm outside echo the one within. She longed for reassurance, for the certainty of truth, yet pride forbade her to ask. What dignity had she left if she must beg a man, her own betrothed, to tell her he cared? She resolved to guard her silence, even if it meant carrying her anguish alone. Days later, London awoke to sunshine and the promise of a garden party at Lord Whitcomb's estate. The air was alive with anticipation, ladies dressed in gauzy muslins and gentlemen in crisp coats, eager to see and be seen. Eleanor, pale but determined, attended at her father's command. Her gown of soft lavender seemed chosen to soothe rather than dazzle, but her beauty, fragile and luminous, could not be subdued. As she walked among the rose-lined paths, laughter and gossip swirled around her. Snatches of conversation struck her ears with cruel familiarity. "It is said the Duke's heart belongs to another. She must know." She quickened her pace, yet each word pressed upon her chest like lead. The cruel brilliance of the flowers mocked her suffering, their fragrance too sweet, their colors too vivid. She longed for quiet, for escape. It was then that a small accident betrayed her. Her fan slipped from her hand, falling soundlessly onto the gravel. Before she could stoop to retrieve it, a shadow moved. The Duke himself bent, lifted it, and placed it back into her grasp. Their fingers brushed again, deliberately, unmistakably. She looked up, startled, and found his gaze fixed upon her, dark eyes softened by something she dared not name. "Lady Eleanor," he said, his voice low, and though the words were few, they carried weight enough to steady her trembling soul. But before she could answer, a rustle of skirts interrupted them. Lady Margaret, whose rivalry was as sharp as her beauty, appeared with a smile far too sweet. She curtsied to Eleanor, then turned her attention boldly to the Duke. "How kind of you, your Grace, to retrieve what has been lost. You have always been attentive in such matters." The implication was clear. Margaret's eyes lingered, daring Eleanor to doubt, daring her to recall the letter. Heat rose in Eleanor's cheeks, shame and suspicion battled within her. The Duke's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, offering only a brief bow before excusing himself. He walked away, leaving Eleanor once more suspended between despair and hope, abandoned in the wake of Margaret's triumph. That night, Eleanor returned home with her thoughts in torment. She spread the letter once more upon her desk, comparing its venom with the memory of his touch, his gaze. Which was real? Which could she trust? She pressed her hand to her breast as if to quiet the storm inside, yet the questions only multiplied. The next morning, a new shock awaited her. Upon her desk lay a white rose, freshly cut, its petals dewy and pristine. No servant could say who had placed it there. Eleanor lifted it, inhaling its delicate fragrance. The flower seemed both an answer and a mystery. Was it a token of devotion? A secret confession from the very man whose silence tormented her? Or was it another cruel jest, designed to deepen her confusion? Her heart warred with itself. She longed to believe it was his, that the Duke, restrained though he was, had at last dared to speak through a gift. But the shadow of betrayal lingered, whispering doubts. She placed the rose carefully within a small glass, watching it bow its head under the weight of its own beauty, as fragile as her hope. The days that followed were no kinder. At Almack's, Eleanor endured the sharp sting of rumor yet again. She heard her name coupled with the Duke's former mistress, her honor questioned in tones of feigned pity. Laughter trailed in her wake like thorns. She bore it with composure, but each word deepened the wound. Her pride forbade her to show pain, yet within she felt herself crumbling. And yet, every so often, a glance, a fleeting moment, would shatter her certainty. At a supper, she felt his gaze upon her across the table, steady and unyielding, as though he could not look elsewhere. At the theater, she caught him watching her when the lights dimmed, his face softened in shadow. Each time she told herself it was nothing, a trick of fancy. Each time her heart refused to believe the lie. The conflict grew unbearable, one hand offering her roses, the other withholding words. She lived in a world where appearances ruled, where dignity must never crack, and yet she longed, desperately, for the truth of his heart. The rose upon her desk wilted slowly, each petal falling like a measure of her dwindling hope. Then came the final blow. Another letter, delivered at dusk, written in the same anonymous hand. "He will end it soon. Prepare yourself." Eleanor clutched the page, her breath short. The warning was clear, merciless. She pressed it to her chest as though it were a knife she could not remove. And in that moment, as she sat alone in the gathering dark, her heart breaking beneath the weight of doubt and pride, a sound broke the silence, the soft tap of carriage wheels upon the gravel outside. She rose, startled, the letter still in her hand. Who had come? Why now? The door opened and a servant bowed low. "My lady," he said, "a message has arrived. From the Duke." The parchment slipped from her fingers, falling forgotten to the floor. For the first time, certainty and fear surged together within her, colliding like storm and tide. Was this the end the letters foretold, or the beginning of the truth she had longed for all along? The storm began not in the skies above London, but within Eleanor's chest. The Duke's summons had arrived with the gravity of command. She was to ride with him after supper, alone. Her father, startled but not displeased, permitted it, eager for any sign that Ashbourne might at last claim his bride in earnest. Yet Eleanor's hands shook as she wrapped her cloak about her shoulders and stepped into the waiting carriage. She carried not only her pride but also the cruel letters that had shadowed her nights, their venom whispering betrayal. She braced herself for the final blow, that he would end it, cast her aside with the cold efficiency that rumor had promised. Rain began to fall as the carriage set off, drumming against the roof, streaking the windows with silver trails. Inside, the flickering light of two lamps cast shifting shadows across the Duke's face. He sat opposite her, tall, implacable, his gloved hands resting upon his knees. For a long while neither spoke. The only sound was the storm outside and the clatter of wheels upon the cobblestones. At last, he broke the silence. "Lady Eleanor," he said, his voice deep, steady, yet edged with something she had never before heard, hesitation. "I fear I have wronged you." Her breath caught. This was it, then. The moment of dismissal. She lifted her chin, determined to endure. "If you mean to release me, Your Grace, I will not plead. I would rather leave with dignity intact than be made to suffer in chains of pity." The words hung between them, sharp and defiant. His eyes narrowed, then softened with something dangerously close to anguish. "Release you?" He leaned forward, the shadows deepening about him. "Is that what you believe of me?" "What else am I to think?" she whispered. "You have given me silence where I longed for truth. The world laughs at me, and you, my betrothed, stand apart as though I am nothing to you. Letters reach my chamber, speaking of your devotion elsewhere. Am I to close my eyes to it all?" He stiffened. "Letters." The word came out like a blade unsheathed. "Yes," she said, her hand clutching the folds of her cloak. "Twice now I have been told that your heart belongs to another, that our union is a farce." For a moment, the storm outside seemed to pause, the carriage rolling forward into a silence more deafening than thunder. His gaze burned into hers, a fire leashed by iron. Then he spoke, each word deliberate, immovable. "Lady Eleanor, hear me well. No hand but mine has written such venom. No lips but yours must be allowed to give them credence. I have never courted another since our betrothal was announced, nor have I desired to. From the first moment I saw you, I whispered to myself words that I have never confessed to another soul." Her heart thudded painfully. "What words?" His gloved hand closed into a fist, then opened again, as though he wrestled with his own restraint. His voice dropped to a low murmur, rough with truth. "You are my world." The carriage jolted over uneven stones, but neither flinched. Eleanor stared at him, scarcely daring to breathe. She had heard the whispers of scorn, the letters dripping with poison, the silence of her fiancé, but never this. The words rang through her as if her soul itself had been struck. Her throat tightened. Why conceal such a thing? If you felt it, why let me believe otherwise? Why let the world mock me? His face, proud and stern, faltered at last. "Because I was a coward," he admitted, voice raw. "My life has been forged in duty, in expectation. A duke may command armies of tenants, secure alliances, and crush opposition, but he may not, must not, expose his heart to the wolves of society. I believed that by silence I could protect you. I see now that my silence has wounded you more deeply than their malice ever could." Tears pricked her eyes, though she fought them. You speak of love as though it were a weakness. Not weakness, he said firmly. Vulnerability. And vulnerability, for a man in my position, can be ruin. His gaze held hers, unflinching. Yet what is ruin, if weighed against the thought of losing you? Her breath shivered. The storm outside lashed against the carriage with renewed fury, as though echoing the tempest within. She wanted desperately to believe him, to surrender her wounded pride and let his words heal her. But doubt, fed too long, still gnawed at her. And yet, she whispered, you do not speak of it where others may hear. You confess here, in shadows and rain, where no witness can hold you accountable. Tomorrow, will you stand apart again, silent while they slander me? He leaned forward, his hand lifting, hesitant, then firm, as it closed around hers. The contact seared her, a tether in the storm. His voice was fierce, stripped of all pretense. Eleanor, I have been blind. But no longer. The time for shadows has passed. If you will grant me the chance, I will prove my devotion before them all. Let them whisper, let them judge. I would rather be mocked as a man who loved too openly than endure another day of silence that wounds you. Her hand trembled within his. She longed to say yes, to cast aside her doubt. Yet fear lingered, a shadow she could not banish with one declaration. She pulled her hand gently free, her voice quiet but resolute. Prove it then. Not to me alone, but to the world that would see me humiliated. Only then will I believe that I am truly your world. The carriage slowed, the sound of hooves striking softer earth. They exchanged no further words, the storm raging around them, the silence between them laden with unspoken vows. At last, the carriage drew to a halt. The driver rapped upon the wood, announcing their arrival. A servant's figure loomed in the rain, lantern raised high, bearing a sealed message. The Duke opened the door, rain spattering his shoulders, and received the missive with a grim nod. He broke the seal, his eyes scanning swiftly. His expression hardened, jaw tight. Eleanor leaned forward, dread clawing at her. What is it? He looked up, his gaze meeting hers with a gravity that chilled her blood. It seems, he said, voice low, that scandal has found you again. A charge of impropriety has been laid at your door, this time, before the whole of London. The storm outside thundered as Eleanor's breath froze in her chest. The cruel letters had been but preludes, now the world itself had been armed against her. And she knew, with terrible certainty, that the trial of his devotion was no longer a matter of whispers, but of public ruin. Disgrace arrived not as a whisper this time, but as a roar. Eleanor's name was spoken aloud in the drawing-rooms of Mayfair, her supposed impropriety with a gentleman she scarcely knew tossed about like a scandalous prize for the hungry. The accusation was absurd, cruelly fabricated, but it clung with the tenacity of smoke, staining her reputation. By evening, the story had swelled beyond control. The Duke's betrothed was faithless, her virtue questionable, her engagement surely doomed. When Eleanor learned of it, the words struck like thunder, her chest tightened, her world tilted, and she understood that silence would no longer protect her. Her father raged, storming through their house with fists clenched, demanding names, demanding retractions. But Eleanor only sat in the dim light of the parlor, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that the knuckles whitened. She heard again the Duke's vow in the carriage, that he would prove his devotion before all. Yet he had not come. He had not spoken. And so she bore the shame alone, her pride battling her despair, her heart trembling between hope and betrayal. The summons to Lord Whitcomb's grand ball came the very next evening, as though fate itself delighted in testing her. Society would be there, all who mattered, all who whispered. Eleanor wanted nothing more than to refuse, to lock her door and vanish. Yet her father insisted she attend, insisting that absence would confirm guilt. "You will hold your head high," he commanded, "and prove yourself blameless by composure alone." And so she went, her lavender gown fastened with trembling fingers, her spirit fragile as glass. The ballroom swam with brilliance, chandeliers ablaze, laughter sharp as crystal. Yet as Eleanor entered, conversation dimmed, then swelled again in ripples of mockery. Eyes turned, lips bent in sly amusement. She felt them measuring her, savoring her supposed downfall. Each glance burned her skin, though she held her chin high, her steps graceful. If dignity was all she possessed, she would wield it as armor. But the whispers grew. The Duke will surely cast her off. What man would bind himself to scandal? She was never suited to him, too meek, too plain. Eleanor's throat tightened, but she forced her expression calm, her heart beating like a hunted bird. She longed for him to appear, to take her hand, to shield her as he had promised. But as the dances began, he was nowhere in sight. She endured 3 polite refusals of partners, each gentleman excusing himself with false civility. Her isolation was plain, cruelly displayed for all to enjoy. Still she stood, back straight, a smile trembling at her lips. The cruelty of the evening threatened to break her, when suddenly a hush fell. The Duke had arrived. He strode through the great doors, tall, dark, commanding, the weight of his presence scattering whispers like leaves in wind. His gaze swept the room until it found her. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath. Eleanor's heart leapt, and then faltered, for though he had come, she did not know if he came as savior or judge. He crossed the room with measured steps, his expression carved in stone. The crowd parted, silenced by the authority in his bearing. Eleanor's pulse thundered as he stopped before her. She curtsied, her voice barely a whisper. "Your Grace." He bowed slightly, eyes never leaving hers. "Lady Eleanor." The silence stretched, heavy, unbearable. Every soul present hung upon the moment, waiting to see if he would cast her aside or claim her still. Eleanor's knees trembled beneath her gown. Then, with a suddenness that stole breath from the room, he reached for her hand. His gloved fingers enclosed hers, strong, resolute, and he drew her forward. Gasps echoed, fans snapped shut. He did not falter. Instead, he turned to face the assembly, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Let no man or woman dare slander this lady's name," he declared, every word thunderous with conviction. "She is my betrothed. She is my honor. She is my world." The words, so long buried in shadow, now rang openly before all of London's finest. Eleanor's breath caught, tears pricked her eyes. For the first time, she felt not mocked nor pitted, but seen, defended not in silence but in fire. The crowd erupted in murmurs, some shocked, some softened, others scandalized. But none could deny the force of his declaration. In a gesture bold enough to sear the memory of every witness, he lifted her hand to his chest, pressing it firmly over the steady beat of his heart. His gaze locked with hers, unflinching. "Judge me if you must," he continued, his voice fierce, "but know this, I would rather be ruined with her than reign unchallenged without her." The air seemed to crackle. Eleanor, trembling, could not speak. Her heart swelled and ached all at once. Around them, the crowd buzzed with conflicting tides, admiration, disapproval, astonishment. But she no longer cared. In that moment, the fortress of his reserve had shattered, and his soul lay bare for her alone. He drew her to the center of the room, leading her into the dance, claiming her publicly with every step. The music resumed, hesitant at first, then swelling as though even the musicians bowed to his will. He held her with a steadiness that calmed her trembling, his gaze upon her as though the rest of the world had ceased to exist. Yet beneath her rising joy lay a tremor of fear. For though his declaration had silenced the crowd tonight, she knew the cost. A duke's reputation was not so easily mended once stained with scandal. His enemies would seize upon this display, twisting his devotion into weakness. And still, he had chosen her, chosen love over calculation, truth over silence. As the dance ended, applause scattered uncertainly, half-hearted from some, admiring from others. He bowed over her hand, lips brushing her knuckles, a gesture more intimate than any embrace. Her cheeks flushed, her heart blazing with a hope she had scarcely dared to dream. But as they stepped aside, Eleanor caught sight of a cluster of gentlemen in the corner, their faces grim, their whispers sharp. One handed another a folded paper, and she felt the old chill return. The Duke's declaration had won the moment, but it had also drawn lines of war. She saw it in their narrowed eyes, in the tension of the room that lingered beneath applause. The Duke, still at her side, followed her gaze. His hand tightened over hers. "Do not fear," he murmured, low enough for her alone. "This battle is only beginning." Her heart surged at his words, torn between triumph and dread. For though she had gained his love at last, she understood that society, wounded in its pride, would not let them rest. And as the last note of the dance faded, a servant entered with urgent haste, pressing a sealed message into the Duke's hand. He opened it, scanned the contents, and his face darkened. Eleanor clutched his arm, her breath shallow. "What is it?" she whispered. He folded the paper slowly, his jaw set. His eyes met hers with a grim fire. "It seems," he said, voice low but steady, "that they mean to force our hand. Tomorrow, Eleanor, the fight for your honor will no longer be waged in whispers. It will be waged in the open." The boom came not from rumor this time, but from the iron strike of consequence. At dawn, the scandal that had hovered in shadows erupted into daylight, printed in the morning papers with bold, merciless ink. Eleanor's name was splashed across columns that detailed, with grotesque embellishment, her supposed indiscretion, while the Duke's declaration at the Whitcomb ball was twisted into folly, his devotion mocked as weakness. By breakfast, the pamphlets had spread through London like wildfire, and her family's servants whispered as they poured the tea. Her father raged, slamming his fist upon the table, demanding satisfaction, demanding duel or redress. But Eleanor sat very still, the words searing themselves into her mind. A duke undone by a woman's artful innocence. Her shame burned, but stronger than shame was fear, not for herself, but for him. His reputation had been their target all along, and now it was torn. She thought of the way he had held her hand in the dance, unshaken before the sneers, and her heart ached with both pride and dread. If the world sought his ruin, then loving her had made her the weapon against him. The Duke arrived before noon, unannounced, his carriage drawing curious eyes along the street. Eleanor heard his footsteps before she saw him, firm, deliberate, as if each one carried the weight of his title. When he entered the drawing-room, his gaze found her immediately, softened by affection, sharpened by resolve. He bowed to her father with cold courtesy, then turned to Eleanor, his voice low but unyielding. "It has begun." Her breath caught. "The papers." "I have seen them," he said, dismissing the matter with a flicker of disdain. "Ink cannot alter truth, though it can wound." His eyes darkened, and the room seemed to contract around his next words. "They will not stop. And so I must answer." Her father leaned forward, gripping the chair arms. "Will you duel? Demand retraction?" "No," the Duke replied, his voice like iron. "I will do what they do not expect. I will marry her now, before they can strike again." Eleanor's heart lurched, torn between astonishment and terror. Marriage had always been the course, but not like this, not as defiance, not under siege. Her lips parted, yet no words came, only the quick flutter of her pulse. "You cannot," her father snapped, though his voice trembled. "Not with their filth in print. It would brand you both forever." The Duke's gaze did not waver. "Then let it brand us. Better branded in truth than free in falsehood." The silence that followed pressed heavy upon Eleanor. Her heart swelled at his vow, yet fear coiled beneath it. To wed now would be to chain him to scandal irrevocably. And yet, was it not what she had longed for, the certainty of his love, made undeniable before the world? She rose, her hands trembling. "If you do this," she whispered, "you will lose everything you have fought to protect." He stepped closer, his shadow falling across her. "What I protect is here," he said softly, pressing her hand once more against his heart. "Do you not see, Eleanor? They strike at me because I love you. But that love is also my shield. Let them rage. Let them howl. I will not surrender you." Tears blurred her vision, her breath catching on the swell of feeling. Yet even as warmth filled her, unease lingered. She saw in him a man resolved to fight, but not yet the full weight of what their union would provoke. She wanted to believe love could shield them, but love had already drawn the fire. By afternoon, the decision was made. Their banns would be read at once, with ceremony rushed by special license. Her father stormed against it, then fell silent when he realized resistance would only estrange his daughter further. Eleanor stood between them, her heart torn by loyalty, her spirit wavering between hope and dread. That evening, word spread again, this time of their impending wedding. Some mocked, some sneered, but some, surprisingly, softened. Whispers arose of romance, of defiance, of a love rare enough to brave disgrace. Yet others sharpened their knives, muttering of plots, debts, and power. Eleanor felt it all pressing around her like invisible walls. She lay awake that night, staring at the canopy above her bed, the candle guttering low. Her mind turned over the Duke's words, his vow to stand unflinching. She wanted to believe it was enough, but she could not shake the memory of those men in the corner at Whitcomb's, their eyes cold, their whispers sharp. They would not yield simply because love had declared itself. She feared the war was only beginning. The next day, as the Duke prepared their petitions for license, a messenger arrived at his estate. The letter he bore was sealed in black, its wax pressed with a sigil Eleanor did not recognize. When the Duke broke it, his expression shifted, first surprise, then anger, then a grim determination. Eleanor found him later in the study, the letter spread before him, his jaw set hard. "What is it?" she asked, her voice tentative. He looked up, eyes shadowed. "A challenge," he said. Her breath caught. "A duel." "Worse," he replied, his voice low, taut with danger. "Not a duel of pistols or blades. A duel of ruin. They have threatened me with exposure, papers, debts, accusations that could topple not only me, but my house." Her blood chilled. "And me?" His gaze softened then, though sorrow lingered. "They mean to break us both. But they underestimate you, Eleanor. They think you fragile. They think I would cast you aside to save myself. But I will not." Her hand trembled as she touched the letter, its words stark upon the page. She felt the walls closing in, the weight of society's cruelty pressing upon their fragile bond. Yet beneath the fear was a strange strength, as though his devotion had kindled her own courage. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze. "Then let them come," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "If you will not surrender me, I will not surrender you." For the first time, his expression broke, and something unguarded shone in his eyes, relief, perhaps even wonder. He drew her close, his forehead resting briefly against hers, and for that moment, the world's malice seemed far away. Yet the letter remained, its threat heavy, its promise of war unfulfilled. Outside, the city churned with gossip, the press inked fresh barbs, and unseen enemies sharpened their blades of rumor and power. And as the study door creaked open, revealing her father pale and shaken, Eleanor knew the next blow had already fallen. He held another letter in his hand, his voice rough as he forced out the words. "It is worse than we feared," he said. "They have not only named you, Eleanor, they have named the Duke. And tomorrow, before all London, they will expose what he has fought all his life to keep hidden."